Hey, what's up, everybody? True Boxing here. Thank you for coming back to get hit with the truth. So today we are doing the fantasy heavyweight tournament rankings. This is going to be on my number 10 seed, former two-time heavyweight champion of the world, Chris Byrd. Before we get into that, if you could smash the like button, leave a comment, or subscribe to the channel, I really do appreciate any support that I can get as I continue to build my channel here. The tournament is coming, guys. I'm starting it probably by tomorrow, maybe the next day. I'm going to be starting releasing the matchups for the first round. Pretty excited about it. Just got to finish doing all these ranking videos and posting them. I want them to all be posted and everything. So it might take maybe 2-3 days before you guys start seeing all these, the matchups posted. But I'm pretty excited about doing it because it's going to be fun. So now before we get into, now we jump into Chris Byrd, former two-time heavyweight champ. And we're going to break him down and look at what he's done in his career, and look over his resume. So Byrd got his first shot at a world title in 2000, but he didn't really deserve it, to be honest. He was an undefeated heavyweight rolling into 1999. But then he ran into Ike Ibeabuchi, and prior to that victory, he really hadn't beaten anybody really significant. He had a win over Ross Purity by a decision, but that was kind of it. And when he ran into Ike Ibeabuchi in March of 99, he got dominated and stopped in 5 rounds. And, that loss should have kind of pushed him back, but there was a whole little mix of heavyweights there that were competing against each other, trying to kind of one-up one another and get into the mix. And in 2000, Byrd got a huge opportunity. He won 4 straight fights after the loss to Ibeabuchi. And then in April of 2000, just about 13 months after the loss, he would take on Vitaly Klitschko, who's the undefeated WBO heavyweight champion. And he pretty much got dominated for 9 rounds. Outworked, out-hustled. It was a pretty one-sided performance in terms of points. But Klitschko would suffer a rotator cuff shoulder injury, and he pulled himself out of the fight prior to the 10th round starting. And Chris Byrd would win by TKO and become the WBO heavyweight champion of the world. Now, at the time, the WBO title was not universally recognized as a part of the undisputed crown, so it was kind of like whatever, especially with the way he won. And then this first reign really gets kind of overlooked because he would then fight Vladimir Klitschko 6 months later in October, Vitaly's brother, and Vladimir would dominate Chris Byrd. He would pick him apart and score knockdowns in the 9th and 11th round on Byrd, en route to a one-sided 12-round unanimous decision, as Klitschko would capture the WBO title from Chris Byrd, and Byrd would have to start back from scratch. But he got back to it just like a little over 3 months later. He returned, got a decision win, and then he would take on Maurice Harris in May of 2001 and get another win there. And that was actually part of a 4-man box-off to determine the IBF's mandatory #1 contender. So the win over Maurice Harris was in the semifinals. Then in the finals, he would take on the hard-hitting David Tua, who at the time had only lost decisions to Ike Ibeabuchi and a decision to Lennox Lewis for the title. Well, Tua wanted to get Lennox Lewis back in the ring, and nobody was really giving Chris Byrd a chance heading into this fight. And Chris Byrd, in my opinion, put on probably the best performance of his career, outboxing, outclassing David Tua to become the mandatory #1 ranked contender. He got a tune-up victory in between over a guy named Jeff Pegas. And then his world title shot would come in December of 2002 when he would challenge for the vacant title against Evander Holyfield, as Lennox Lewis didn't think that Byrd was a big enough name, which he really wasn't, especially after Lewis had defeated Mike Tyson in June of 2002. So Lewis would give up the IBF title and just hold on to the WBC belt, and Byrd would get his opportunity at the title against former four-time heavyweight champion of the world, Evander Holyfield. Holyfield was coming off of his trilogy with John Ruiz that ended a year prior. He had gotten a victory over Hasim Rahman earlier in the year, and then was, you know, kind of poised for this fight with Byrd, but Byrd just stylistically was just a bad matchup for Evander, and he cleanly outboxed and dominated Evander to a clean 12-round unanimous decision. And just like that, Byrd was now a two-time heavyweight champion of the world, but was holding on to a legitimate title. Following that, he would struggle, though, because of his style, to get a big-name opponent in the ring. So he would make a mandatory defense against Fresa Kendo, who had only had one loss at that point. And it was kind of an ugly battle between the two. They were going at it, but it ended up being a pretty decent battle down the stretch, where Byrd would take a close unanimous decision in a fight that some people thought Oquendo might have won, but Byrd got the nod and retained his belt. Then in April of 2004, Byrd would put the title on the line against Andrew Galata. A lot of people were pissed about this because most people felt Byrd was going to dominate Galata, and Galata hadn't earned a title shot. But this ended up being one of the best fights of this last 25 years of heavyweight title fights, as these two guys went toe-to-toe for 12 rounds. Great action-packed fight. I think I had Byrd winning, or Galata winning 6-5 heading into the 12th round, and I gave Byrd the 12th. The fight was declared a draw. I had it a draw. I thought that was the right call, but really, it could have went either way, but it was a great fight. It ended with a draw, and Byrd was allowed to retain his title. But instead of a rematch, Galata went in the direction of fighting John Ruiz for the WBA belt. So Byrd, in November of 04, would return to defend his title against big-time Jamil McCline. And this one ended up being a good one as well. I think McCline knocked Byrd down earlier in the fight, but Byrd stormed back. Ended up being a very good fight. Down the stretch, Byrd wore down McCline and looked like he could potentially stop him. McCline showed a lot of heart. They went to the scorecards where Byrd would take a close split decision and retain his title again in another close fight. But again, Byrd would struggle to land a big name opponent. Nobody really wanted to fight him. And so in October of 05, Byrd would take on Deverell Touch of Sleep Williamson. Byrd was not really thrilled about this fight. And this, in my opinion, is probably the worst heavyweight title fight I've ever seen. Neither guy wanted to pull the trigger and go after each other. It was a very ugly, horrible fight. And after 12 rounds, Byrd would get a unanimous decision, but nobody cared because it was such a boring, dull fight where neither guy threw punches. Byrd would retain his title, but that would be the last victory in a title fight Byrd would record. He would return in April, about 6.5 months later, return in April of 06 to defend his title against Vladimir Klitschko in a rematch, as Vladimir was his mandatory #1 contender for this belt. Byrd vowed he was going to attack Vlad more and it would be a different fight. It was a different fight, but again in Vlad's favor, as Vlad landed big punches because Byrd was coming at him a little bit more. He landed big punches. He knocked Byrd down in the 5th, and then in the 7th round put him down hard again. Byrd got up with a bloody face, and the referee would stop the fight, and Vladimir Klitschko became the new IBF champion. And Byrd, that would be his last title fight. He would return with a victory in April of 07 against an unknown fighter, and then he was thrown into a 4-man box off to become the IBF's mandatory challenger again. And he would go in against undefeated Alexander Povetkin, and Povetkin would outwork Byrd and just kind of beat him up around the ring, and then stop Chris Byrd in the 11th round of their fight, and move on to the tournament final. He would try to make a stance at light heavyweight. He would move down to light heavyweight. He would get beat in his first fight there, and then he retired in March of his last fight was in March of 2009, where he got a TKO victory there, and that was pretty much all she wrote for Chris Byrd's career. He would not return to the ring. He would never get back into contention, and that was it for him. So Byrd, in about a 6-year stretch, had 2 title reigns. Put up a record of 5-2-1 in 8 title fights, which is not bad. Didn't record a knockout in any of those outside of the victory over Vitaly Klitschko. But, you know, you look at his wins, there were some close ones, but he beat Evander Holyfield in a fight where he should have beat him, and he beat him convincingly to capture the title. That was an impressive performance. He took on some of the better heavyweights of his day in Fresakendo. Andrew Galata had a good stretch there that year. You know, he really gave John Ruiz a good fight and should have beat him. And Jamil McClain was a decent heavyweight, and he beat him. So Chris Byrd, he gets very underrated. You know, he gets overlooked. Was only 6'2", wasn't a big guy, not a big power puncher, slick southpaw, but he had his moment, and he had some solid wins. And really, the guys that owned him, you know, well, it was Vladimir Klitschko, were both his losses in heavyweight title fights. He technically had a win over Vitaly Klitschko, but you know, Alexander Povetkin was a very, very good fucking heavyweight who beat him at the end. Ike Ibeabuchi didn't beat him in the 2000s, but that was the other big heavyweight loss that he had. You know, losing to Vladimir Klitschko, he went 12 rounds with him. He had a good chin. He could stand in there against guys and take punches, and was slick and could box himself. So I really liked Chris Byrd. I did. I thought he was solid. He wasn't the most entertaining, but he was a good boxer. He wasn't afraid to fight anybody, and you know, he was a grinder. So I liked him. I'm interested in seeing stylistically how he does against some of the guys in this tournament, and that's pretty much it. So that was the fantasy heavyweight rankings for my interactive tournament that I'm hosting. That was on the number 10 seed, Chris Byrd, the former 2-time heavyweight champion. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash the like button, leave a comment, or subscribe to the channel. I appreciate any and all support. This is True Boxing. You've been hit with the truth.